Bo-Kjellen, you has been the ambassador of environment in Sweden and worked with all these negotiations. If you compare 1972 and 2012, we are attending the next meeting. What are your reflections?
Well, my reflections is that my main reflection is obviously to say that Sweden played a major role in launching the environment, and I think that the work that was done by Sverker Åström, for instance, at that time was instrumental. And he and Sweden were, of course, also present when the idea for a 20-year follow-up conference came up. It was a Swedish proposal, but the Brazilians wanted to have it, and I think it was very good that way. I was, as you know, very much involved in the Rio conference as Sweden's chief negotiator, and also as chairman of one of the plenary working groups of the preparatory committee. And even though I'm part of this, I think it's fair to say that the Rio conference was a very important step forward.
But now we hear that France is launching a new idea, the World Environment Organization. The world requires a new environmental institution.
Well, we already have one, of course, in UNEP, and there has been many different views whether one should really need to transform it into a World Environment Organization. I think now it could be a good idea. It would launch the environment as a more important issue. But as I mentioned in this meeting here today also, I think that one has to look a little further up and say that environment is so much a part of the general policy agenda now in the United Nations that it would warrant to have transform the trusteeship council into a trusteeship for the global commons and for the coming generations. But I don't see a real problem in that because if one would transform UNEP, which is right now just a program within the United Nations, into a World Environment Organization, it would strengthen the whole area of environment. But at the same time, I think it would not be enough because you need links to other major issues, not least the foreign policy and the economic policy aspects.
And you have, based on your experiences during decades, written a book about the real challenges that is needed.
Well, I tried to write that book on the basis of my own experience and also some ideas I have, namely that I think we are really living in a new situation because we are meeting threats that are of a completely different nature than the traditional ones, with threats that are linked to one state or to several states and so on. But here it is within ourselves. The enemy is ourselves in a way, and in that way we're also all on the same side. Everybody speaks about globalization and that it has impacts that are economic, social, political and cultural. But this all has to do with humans, with our impact on human systems. But here humanity has created threats of a different kinds that mean that we are upsetting the enormously big natural systems in the world, like climate, like biological diversity and so on. And that means that these big systems, we have never had an opportunity. Our generation is the first that have been able to influence these global natural systems. So in a way, it's the Anthropocene. We are a force of nature as the human race. But in fact, in terms of the effects, if these systems start to collapse because of us, as single individuals, we're extremely weak in that respect, and we can't do much about it then.
So now they are out of sync. Do you think we will sync them again?
I don't know. It has to be made at another level, of course. I think we can't necessarily restore them to what they were, but we have to act in such a way that the major disasters are avoided and that we will be able to continue with perhaps 9 billion people on the planet and yet have the ecosystem services there. But it won't go itself. And I think that we have today we have knowledge and we have also an understanding that it's necessary to do things which is far greater than it was in 1972, of course. What is new now is, of course, that we have countries like India and China and so on that were at that time rather marginal in the context of the global problems are now in the very center, and we have to realize that they represent between 35 and 40% of the human race now. So we have to have them in the negotiations, and my feeling is that even though there is a lot of talk about the failures in Copenhagen and so on, I think that Cancun demonstrated that as far as climate is concerned, there is an understanding for the need for common action also in those countries. And but then, as I also had the opportunity to say here in this conference, I think it is extremely important that we realize that we can't operate the changes that are needed in terms of reducing emissions if we are not investing in new technology. Otherwise, it won't happen. And I think that this technological change is on its way.